All right, let's get right into it. For the longest time, we were taught that most of our genetic code was, well, junk. Just evolutionary leftovers taking up space. But what if that so-called junk was actually the secret to what makes us so complex? Today, we're talking about the hidden genius hiding in our DNA.
I mean, just stop and think about that for a second. Imagine you had the blueprint for a complex machine, but 98% of it was just scribbles and doodles. You'd probably toss it, right? Well, for decades, that's pretty much how scientists viewed our own genetic blueprint. Sounds kind of crazy, doesn't it?
But that number is real and absolutely staggering. 98.5% of the human genome does not code for proteins. Now, that other tiny 1.5% builds everything, your hair, your heart, your brain. So the big question was, what on earth is all the rest of this stuff doing? It got a pretty dismissive name, as you can imagine.
Yep, they called it junk DNA. The main theory for a long time was that it was all just useless baggage. Fossils from ancient viruses that got stuck in our code, or selfish little bits of DNA that just copied themselves over and over like a parasite, not really contributing anything useful. And that name, junk DNA, it really stuck. And because of it, this huge part of our genome was basically ignored for decades.
But here's the thing about science. It's all about questioning what we think we know for sure. And slowly but surely, that whole junk DNA idea started to get some serious cracks in it. This wasn't some big overnight discovery either. It was more like a quiet revolution that took decades to really take hold.
And it's pretty wild how long this story has been playing out. Way back in the 1950s, a scientist named Barbara McClintock suggested that some genes could actually move around and act as controlling elements. But her ideas were so ahead of their time, pretty much everyone dismissed them. So fast forward to the 80s, and the whole selfish DNA parasite theory becomes the main explanation. It wasn't until the Human Genome Project wrapped up in the 2000s that we had to face the reality of just how much of this non-coding DNA there was. That really sparked a new wave of curiosity. And now, here in the 2020s, it's official. The junk theory is dead.
And this quote right here, it just perfectly captures what McClintock was up against. It's such a great reminder that science isn't about just defending old ideas. It's about staying open to new ones, even and especially when they seem weird or go against everything we currently believe. The whole story of junk DNA is just a classic example of a revolutionary idea that finally got its due.
So just how much of this junk are we actually talking about? A lot. A whole lot. Get this, transposable elements, those ancient viral bits we thought were just freeloading, they make up almost half of our DNA, 45%. And when you add in all the other non-coding stuff, you see just how tiny that little slice of protein-coding genes really is. It turns out this massive chunk of our genome isn't junk at all. It's more like a super important part of our body's operating system.
Okay, so if it's not junk, then what is it doing? Well, what we're finding out is that this huge, mysterious part of our genome is basically a super sophisticated control panel, like a whole system of power switches and volume dials for our genes.
Here's a really easy way to think about it. A gene is like a light bulb. It has the potential to light up and do something, but it's not going to do anything until someone or something flips the switch. That whole process, turning a gene on or turning it off, or even just dimming it up or down, that's called gene expression. And this is exactly where our so-called junk DNA makes its grand entrance.
Now, the hands that are flipping these switches, they're these special proteins called transcription factors. They're designed to hunt for very specific little landing pads on our DNA. These short sequences are called motifs. For a long time, we thought that was the end of the story. The protein finds its perfect little landing spot, binds to it, and boom, the gene turns on. But as it turns out, it's way more interesting than that.
This is where it gets really cool. Recent studies have found something incredible. The DNA that's all around that landing pad, the stuff we used to call junk, it's not just sitting there. It actually acts like a volume dial. These surrounding sequences can reach out and interact with the protein, and they can dramatically change how tightly it sticks to the DNA. We're talking about amplifying its effect up to 70 times. That's the difference between a little flicker and a giant spotlight. And that is how our bodies get such incredibly precise, fine-tuned control over our genes.
And if you need to see it to believe it, just look at this. On the left, you've got a healthy mouse embryo developing normally. On the right, scientists turned off a single piece of non-coding RNA, one tiny bit of so-called junk called FENDRA. And the result? It's catastrophic. The heart, the body wall, it all goes terribly wrong. This image, better than any words, shows you that these sequences are not junk. They are absolutely essential.
So, what we're realizing is that this isn't just about a few individual switches here and there.
This discovery fundamentally changes how we see our entire genome. It's not some static blueprint. It's a living, breathing, dynamic operating system. So, let's just compare the old way of thinking to the new one. The old genetic blueprint idea was pretty static. It focused only on that 1.5% of protein-coding genes, and everything else was just noise. But the new genetic ecosystem view sees the whole thing as a dynamic network. The genes are still vital, of course, but it's the non-coding DNA that provides all the complex regulation and the flexibility that allows life to adapt and evolve. It's a complete paradigm shift.
I love this quote because it just sums it all up perfectly. What we thought was useless debris is actually an evolutionary toolkit. Think about that. These sequences, many of them from ancient viruses, have been repurposed and fine-tuned over millions and millions of years to build the complex regulatory systems that make us who we are.
And here's the real kicker. If you look across the tree of life, you see a really clear pattern. The more complex an organism is, the more non-coding DNA it has. Bacteria, very little. Humans, a ton. That correlation is a huge clue. It suggests that all this regulatory complexity isn't just a fun feature of advanced life, it might be the very thing that makes advanced life possible in the first place.
Okay, so this is all really fascinating science, I get it. But why does it actually matter to you and me in our daily lives? Well, because the real-world implications for our health are just enormous. Because this regulatory landscape is so vast and so important, when things go wrong with it, the consequences can be devastating. Small changes in these non-coding regions are now being linked to a whole host of complex conditions, everything from autism and schizophrenia to different cancers and heart diseases. For decades, we were scratching our heads trying to find the genetic causes for these illnesses by only looking at the protein-coding genes. Turns out we might have been looking in the wrong 98% of the genome.
And beyond disease, these elements are doing absolutely critical jobs every single second of every day. There's an RNA called ZIST that's responsible for silencing an entire X chromosome in female mammals, a totally fundamental process. Telomeres, the little non-coding caps on the ends of our chromosomes, are what stop our DNA from literally unraveling. And introns, which we used to think were just junk that got cut out, are now seen as key to letting a single gene make thousands of different versions of a protein. These things are the true unsung heroes of our cells.
So in the end, we've gone from thinking our genome is 98% junk to realizing it's this incredibly complex, dynamic, and profoundly functional network, and we've really only just begun to understand it. We're finally shining a light on the dark matter of the genome. Which really makes you wonder, right? What other incredible secrets are still hiding right there in plain sight?